The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I just received some extremely reliable information. Paul will be returning to Genoa because Patty is his sister. Paul is a model cop, and although he's been absent for a long time, he was never actually removed from Genoa. Paul's involvement in Patty's past stories has never been simple or one-sided. He's not just a supportive older brother standing on the sidelines. Victor and Paul have a deep-seated feud in the show, but in real life, they're close friends, and that tension has shaped him as a person. It makes him more human in a very realistic way, especially in a world where extremes often prevail. Patty is a crazy and strong-willed woman, and Paul understands that, so he wouldn't dare let his sister act foolishly. Now, Paul lives in Portugal geographically, far from Genoa, but he's ready to return at any time for no particular reason, because Patty without Paul isn't just an unchecked, dangerous character. Patty is terrified of her brother, so when she hears Paul is back, she immediately flees. But Paul won't forgive anyone. Anyone guilty will be apprehended. Without Paul, the story risks leaning too heavily towards chaos, lacking the emotional balance that gives meaning to that chaos. With him, the level of danger becomes more complex. It's no longer just about what Patty can do. It's about how far Paul is willing to go to stop her, protect her, or even face the reality that he can't do both at once. Jack, Nikki, and Diane are in danger, and it takes someone as strong as Paul to resolve this. And will Paul easily resolve it? Time apart can create clarity, but it can also create distance in ways harder to bridge than anticipated. If he returns, will he immediately assume the role of protector again, or will he hesitate, aware that each time he did so in the past, it dragged him deeper into a vicious cycle he could never fully control? That internal conflict alone can carry significant emotional weight, because protecting Patty has never been an easy choice. It always comes with consequences both for her and for him. And then there's Patty herself. The possibility of Paul returning not only affects the story's structure, but also the emotional trajectory of her character. Patty's reaction is rarely predictable, especially when it comes to family. Paul represents safety for her, but also judgment, the past, and a mirror she cannot easily escape. His presence could either stabilize her or it could push her to even greater extremes, depending on how she interprets his intentions. Does she see him as a returning ally to stand by her side, or as someone returning to control her once again? That ambiguity is where the real tension lies. What makes all this meaningful is the sense that some relationships in this film aren't destined to quietly fade into oblivion. Paul and Patty have one such relationship. It's messy, complex, often painful, but undeniably real. And as the plot begins to gravitate back to Patty's instability, her past actions, and the ripple effects she creates around her, the picture seems incomplete without Paul somewhere, even if only as a potential possibility. Honestly, bringing Paul back at this point not only serves the plot, but also deepens it. It adds emotional depth to a story that already has the potential to escalate into something more. The sun setting over the Algarve coast usually brought Paul Williams a profound sense of peace. The Golden Hour in Portugal was a masterpiece of amber light, reflecting off the Atlantic, a stark contrast to the gray, biting winters of Wisconsin. He had come here to clear his head, to step away from the relentless grind of Genoa City's endless scandals and the heavy badge he had worn for so long. But the buzzing of his encrypted burner phone shattered the tranquility. Paul stared at the screen. The caller ID was blocked, but the encryption key matched an old contact from his private investigation days. He answered, the ocean breeze suddenly feeling unnaturally cold against his skin. Paul, the voice crackled through the secure line. I wouldn't call if it wasn't a 5-alarm fire. What is it? Paul asked, his jaw tightening. The instinctual shift from vacationer to seasoned investigator was instantaneous. It's Patty. She's back in Genoa City. Paul's blood ran cold. That's impossible. She's supposed to be secure. Who moved her? That's the worst part, Paul. Victor Newman. He's pulled her strings, brought her back into the fold. And it's messy. It involves Jack Abbott. Serious trouble, Paul. The kind of trouble Patty doesn't walk away from. The phone felt heavy in his hand. Patty, his fragile, deeply troubled sister. The woman who had spent her life battling her own mind, only to be repeatedly chewed up and spat out by the ruthless power players of their hometown. If Victor Newman had his claws in her, it wasn't out of the goodness of his heart. Victor only dealt in pawns, and Patty's fractured psyche made her the ultimate tragic chess piece. A fierce, overwhelming wave of protective rage surged through Paul's veins. Victor was manipulating her, using her fragile state to strike at his eternal rival, Jack. Paul didn't need to hear another word. He hung up the phone, the picturesque Portuguese sunset now looking like a fading illusion. He was going back. 48 hours later, the relentless freezing rain of Genoa City battered the windshield of Paul's rented sedan. He hadn't announced his return. To the Genoa City Police Department, Paul was still on an extended European sabbatical. To his friends and family, he had been vague, promising a quick detour for an old case. He needed to operate in the shadows. If Victor knew he was in town, the mustache would bury Patty so deep Paul would never find her. Paul parked a block away from the monolithic Newman Enterprises tower. The glass and steel structure loomed in the stormy night like a fortress of corporate greed. He pulled his trench coat tight against the biting wind, his eyes fixed on the private garage entrance. He had spent his entire adult life reading the criminal underbelly of this city, and Victor Newman was the slickest operator of them all. For 3 days, Paul lived on black coffee and adrenaline, tracking Victor's movements, tapping into localized security feeds, and shaking down low-level informants who owed him favors. He pieced together the horrifying timeline. Victor's black market fixers had arranged a transfer for Patty from her psychiatric facility. They had set her up in a secluded property on the outskirts of town. But what was the end game? Paul watched Victor's head of security, a hulking man with dead eyes, load a series of unmarked crates into a black SUV. Paul tailed them, keeping 2 cars between his sedan and the SUV, his mind racing with terrifying possibilities. What did Victor want with Jack Abbott, and how did Patty fit into this sick equation? The SUV led Paul to an abandoned pharmaceutical warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. After the security team left, Paul picked the rusted lock on the side door, slipping into the cavernous, damp building. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating discarded pallets and dust-covered machinery. In the back office, he found what he was looking for. The room was unnaturally clean, outfitted with a cot, a table, and a locked filing cabinet. It took Paul less than 2 minutes to bypass the cheap tumbler lock on the cabinet. He pulled out a thick manila folder, his flashlight highlighting the Newman Enterprises watermark on the medical requisition forms. As he read the documents, his stomach violently churned. Victor hadn't just brought Patty back, he had weaponized her trauma. The logs detailed a horrifying narrative. Victor had convinced Patty that Jack Abbott, the man who had broken her heart decades ago, the man who had been the catalyst for so much of her mental anguish, needed to be saved. Victor had manipulated her delusions, feeding her a twisted narrative where kidnapping Jack was an act of love. Worse, the requisition forms detailed heavy illegal sedatives. Victor had supplied Patty with the drugs to keep Jack incapacitated. Patty had been the one to drug him, the one to hold him captive, entirely unaware that she was committing multiple felonies under the guise of a romantic rescue mission orchestrated by Victor Newman. "You son of a bitch, Paul," whispered to the empty room, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound sorrow and explosive anger. Victor was using Patty as the perfect fall guy. When the kidnapping was inevitably discovered, Patty would be found holding the syringe, her fingerprints all over the crime scene, her history of mental instability making her the perfect, undeniable culprit. Victor would walk away clean, having neutralized Jack Abbott, while an innocent, sick woman took the fall. Paul didn't sleep. He used the GPS coordinates from a burner phone receipt he found in the warehouse to locate the actual safe house where Patty was currently being kept. It was a decaying cabin nestled deep in the Chancellor Woods, miles away from prying eyes. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, suffocating fog in its wake. Paul approached the cabin silently, his hand instinctively resting on the cold steel of his concealed firearm. He peered through the dirty window. Inside, illuminated by the flickering light of a single kerosene lamp, sat Patty. She was humming a disjointed, haunting melody, brushing the fur of a tattered, stuffed cat. She looked so small, so devastatingly fragile. Her blonde hair was unkempt, her eyes wide and vacant, lost in a world Victor Newman had meticulously constructed for her. Paul picked the lock on the back door and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked. Patty gasped, dropping the stuffed cat, her eyes darting toward the shadows. "Who's there?" Mr. Newman said. "I wasn't to have visitors. I'm doing a good job. I'm keeping him safe." "Patty," Paul said softly, stepping into the dim light, holding his hands up to show he was unarmed. "It's me. It's Paul." Patty blinked her head, tilting to the side like a confused child. "Polly," she whispered the nickname, slipping through her trembling lips. You're in Europe. You're on a beach." "I came back for you, Patty," Paul said, his voice thick with emotion. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, terrified of spooking her. "I came back because I know what's happening. I know what Victor made you do." Patty's face hardened, a sudden flash of defensive panic taking over. "No, Mr. Newman is my friend. He helped me see the truth. Jack needs me, Polly. Jack is sick, and I have to give him his medicine. I'm the only one who loves him enough to keep him safe." "Patty, look at me," Paul pleaded, closing the distance and kneeling before her chair. He gently took her trembling hands in his. They were ice cold. "Victor isn't your friend. He doesn't care about you. He's using you to hurt Jack. The medicine, it's hurting Jack, Patty. It's poison." "No," Patty shrieked, yanking her hands away and covering her ears. "You're lying. You always try to take me away. You lock me up in those white rooms. Mr. Newman gave me a purpose." "He gave you a cage," Paul fired back, though he kept his tone remarkably steady, channeling all his love and desperation into his gaze. "Patty, think about it. If Victor really wanted to help Jack, why are you hiding in the woods? Why are you giving him drugs in the dark? Jack is a powerful man. If he were sick, he'd be in a hospital. Victor is using your beautiful, loving heart against you." Patty stopped rocking. Her breath hitched in her throat. The manic energy that had been sustaining her began to crack, revealing the terrified, deeply empathetic woman beneath the delusions. She looked down at her hands, imagining the vials of sedatives she had been instructed to inject into Jack's arm. He didn't wake up," Patty whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I kept telling him I loved him, but he just slept. He looked so pale, Polly. I asked Mr. Newman if we should call a doctor, and he yelled at me. He told me I would go to prison if I stopped." "That was a lie to control you," Paul said, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "You are not a criminal, Patty. You are a victim in this, but you have to let me help you. You have to want to break free from him." Patty looked at the stuffed cat on the floor, then up at her brother. The fog in her eyes began to clear, replaced by a profound, agonizing clarity. She realized the horrifying truth. She hadn't been a savior. She had been an executioner's assistant. "I hurt Jack," she sobbed, collapsing into Paul's arms. "Oh God, Polly, I hurt him. I was just a pawn, a stupid, broken pawn." "You're not stupid," Paul fiercely whispered into her hair, holding her tightly as she wept. "You're my sister, and I am going to tear Victor Newman apart for what he did to you." Paul relocated Patty to a secure, off-the-books motel room under an assumed name, leaving her with a trusted, retired psychiatric nurse he had known for decades. He couldn't go to the GCPD yet. If he arrested Victor now, the high-priced Newman lawyers would spin the narrative, painting Patty as a deranged stalker who acted alone and Victor as an innocent bystander. Paul needed an ironclad kill shot. He needed the digital footprint. Using a series of encrypted proxies, Paul reached out to Kevin Fisher, a master hacker who owed him more than a few favors. Operating out of the back of Paul's rental car, Kevin tapped into the Newman Enterprises mainframe. It was a digital fortress, but Victor's arrogance was his Achilles heel. He always kept a private, heavily encrypted ledger of his black market dealings, insurance policies against his own fixers. "I'm in," Kevin muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard in the glow of the laptop screen. "But Paul, if Victor's IT guys trace this back to us, we're both looking at federal hacking charges. Just find the offshore accounts, Paul commanded, his eyes scanning the dark street. Find the payments to the psychiatric facility that released Patty and the purchase orders for the sedatives. 10 agonizing minutes passed before Kevin hit the jackpot. Got it. Wire transfers from a Newman Shell Corporation in the Caymans directly to the clinic administrator. And here, an audio file. It looks like a voicemail Victor left for his head of security. Kevin played the file. Victor's unmistakable gravelly baritone filled the car. Asterisk, make sure the Williams woman administers the dosage exactly as instructed. If she fails, remind her that she will spend the rest of her miserable life in a padded cell. She is entirely expendable. Just keep Abbott out of the picture. Asterisk. Paul felt a cold, hard smile form on his lips. It was the smoking gun. Victor had explicitly detailed his exploitation of Patty's psychological state. He had orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Download it all to a flash drive, Paul said, his voice carrying the lethal calm of a man about to go to war. And wipe our traces. The executive suite of Newman Enterprises was a monument to power all dark, wood, leather, and panoramic views of the city Victor believed he owned. Victor was seated behind his massive desk reviewing quarterly reports when the heavy mahogany doors swung open without a knock. Victor looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the former police chief. Paul, I was under the impression you were wandering around Europe, finding yourself. I found something much more interesting right here in Genoa City, Victor, Paul said, stepping into the room and letting the doors click shut behind him. He didn't sit. He walked directly to the desk, his presence commanding and unyielding. I'm very busy, Paul. If this is a social call, make an appointment with my assistant, Victor said, dismissively, returning his gaze to his papers. Paul reached into his trench coat, pulled out the silver flash drive, and tossed it onto the center of Victor's desk. It landed with a sharp clatter. That is your resignation from my sister's life, Paul stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Victor paused, his eyes flickering to the drive, then back to Paul. I have no idea what you're talking about. Save the performance, Victor. I have it all. The wire transfers to the clinic. The purchase orders for the sedatives you used to drug Jack Abbott, and a lovely audio recording of you instructing your goons to use Patty's mental illness as a weapon, explicitly stating she is an expendable pawn. For a fraction of a second, Victor's mask slipped. The slight tightening of his jaw was the only indication that Paul had drawn blood, but Victor Newman never surrendered easily. You obtained that illegally. It would never hold up in court, Paul. In fact, I could have you arrested for corporate espionage. Paul leaned over the desk, planting both hands on the polished wood, getting inches from Victor's face. Do you really want to test me, Victor? You think I give a damn about court? If you don't back off right now, I won't go to the DA. I will go to the FBI. I will go to the SEC. I will go to the press. I will broadcast that audio file on every network in the country. Your board of directors will crucify you. Your family will turn their backs on you. You will be exposed as a man who tortures mentally ill women to settle petty grudges. The silence in the room was deafening. The two patriarchs stared each other down, a battle of wills forged over decades of animosity. Victor calculated the odds, his cold, pragmatic mind weighing the destruction of his empire against the satisfaction of destroying Jack. Finally, Victor leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and let out a slow breath. What are your terms? You drop all association with Patty. You ensure her name is entirely cleared from this mess with Jack. You take the heat for the kidnapping, or you pin it on one of your disposable fixers. But Patty is a ghost. She was never here. If anyone comes looking for her, if a single police officer knocks on her door, I release the drive. Victor stared at the flash drive, his expression unreadable. Take your sister and get out of my city, Paul. If she crosses my path again, I will not be so accommodating. Paul snatched the flash drive off the desk. You're the one who crossed her path, Victor. Pray you never do it again. The coastal air of Northern California was crisp and restorative, a world away from the toxic, suffocating atmosphere of Genoa City. Paul sat on the wooden porch of the private, high-end therapeutic retreat, watching the waves crash against the rocky shoreline. The door behind him opened and Patty stepped out wrapped in a thick woolen shawl. The manic energy that had consumed her in the cabin was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. The doctors here were the best in the country, and more importantly, they were entirely independent of Victor Newman's reach. She sat in the Adirondack chair next to Paul, looking out at the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. "It's beautiful here, Polly," she said softly. "It is," Paul agreed, reaching over to take her hand. It was warm now, grounded in reality. "I still have nightmares," Patty admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "About the dark room, about Jack, about what I almost did to him." "You didn't do it, Patty. Victor did. You were just the weapon he wielded. But he can't hurt you anymore. I made sure of that." Patty looked at her older brother, tears of genuine gratitude welling in her eyes. "You saved my life, Paul. You came all the way from Europe to pull me out of the dark." Paul squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring, deeply loving smile. "I'll always come back for you, Patty. No matter how far away I am, no matter who is standing in the way, you're my sister." As they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Paul knew the road to recovery would be long and arduous for Patty. The scars Victor Newman had left on her psyche wouldn't heal overnight. But for the first time in a very long time, Patty wasn't a pawn in someone else's war. She was free. She had her autonomy, her safety, and the unwavering support of a brother who had risked everything to bring her back to the light. The shadows of Genoa City were finally behind them, replaced by the boundless, hopeful promise of the open sea.